The neon sign hums the way dying things hum, not quite dead, not quite alive, and the light it throws across the gravel lot is the color of a bruise going yellow at the edges. Blue Ridge Diner, it says, and every letter still works, which is its own kind of miracle out here, where nothing gets fixed, only replaced or abandoned. She turns the key in the deadbolt at 6:47 in the evening, the sun already dropping fast behind the far ridge, and the desert cold comes on quick, the way it does in this part of Nevada, like the day was only ever borrowed. Inside, the chairs are already stacked. The griddle ticks as it cools, and she stands a moment at the register, the way she does every night now, and looks at the small frame bolted beside the credit card machine. A napkin, folded once into quarters. The ink gone soft and gray, with a year of light through the window glass. 4 words. You don't know yet what those words cost, or who paid for them, or how close they came to being the last thing anyone ever noticed about her. Imagine it for a moment. Imagine you are tired in a way that has stopped feeling like tiredness and started feeling like weather, something that lives in you permanently, like a season that never changes. Imagine a stranger walks in past midnight, road dust on his boots, grief riding behind his eyes like a passenger he can't put down. And imagine that of every person who has come through that door in 4 years, something in you decides, quietly, without permission from the rest of you, that this one, this particular stranger with the patches on his vest and the tired eyes, is the one you hand your whole unspoken life to. 4 words, no name, no explanation, just ink on a napkin, slid across a counter with a coffee refill, the way you'd slide someone their check. That is where this story begins. Not tonight, with the door locked and the ridge gone purple behind her, but a year ago, at a counter 300 miles from here, in a diner with a sign that didn't work right, at a truck stop nobody stopped at unless they had to. She turns off the open sign. The hum dies with it, and the quiet that's left is the particular quiet of a small town at dusk. Cicadas winding down, a truck downshifting somewhere on the state highway, the kind of stillness that either means nothing happened here or everything did. Stay with this one to the end. You'll understand, by the time we get there, exactly what those 4 words meant and exactly what it cost to write them. And before you go any further, tell me where you're watching from, your city, your state, wherever this finds you tonight. Some of you are closer to a place like Copperflat than you think, because a year before she ever locked this door, she was somewhere else entirely, behind a different counter, under a different sign, with a bruise she was still learning how to hide. A year before that, and 3 weeks before that, the highway ran straight into the sun and gave nothing back for miles. He rode into it anyway, because riding into it was easier than sitting still with what waited behind him. The bike ate up the asphalt in long, patient pulls, the kind of riding that isn't about getting anywhere, so much as putting distance between a man and a hole freshly cut into a Nevada hillside. Sagebrush blurred past in low gray clumps. The sky had gone the color of a healing bruise, orange bleeding into purple bleeding, into the first hard stars, and the air had that particular desert coolness that arrives fast after sundown, like the land itself couldn't hold on to the day's heat any longer than it had to. His saddlebags rode heavier than they should have for a man traveling light. Folded at the bottom of the left one, still creased from the dry cleaner's plastic, was the black suit he'd worn 11 days earlier, standing at the edge of a grave that hadn't needed to exist yet, not for another 30, 40 years, if things had gone the way they were supposed to. He hadn't taken the suit out since. Hadn't needed to. But he hadn't been able to leave it behind either, the way some men can't throw away a call they never returned. 5 years his brother had been out of the life, out of the cut, out of the weekly rides and the noise, and the brothers who might have noticed sooner. 5 years clean by his own accounting, though accounting like that is usually a story a man tells himself between relapses. The overdose had come quiet, the way they mostly do, not in some back alley but in a rented room with the television still playing, found 2 days later by a landlord tired of knocking. He hadn't intervened. That was the fact he carried now, folded as tight as the suit. Not that he hadn't loved him, not that he hadn't tried, once or twice, in the clumsy way men like him try. A phone call, a wired $100, a promise to visit, that got pushed back a season, and then another. He had assumed there would be time. There is always, right up until there isn't, an assumption that there will be time. So he rode west with no particular destination, the way grief sometimes disguises itself as a road trip, and somewhere past midnight the reflectors on a faded sign caught his headlight. Copper Flat, next exit, a number of miles that meant nothing to him yet, and beneath it, smaller, half swallowed by dust, a second sign for food, gas, lodging, the kind of place a man stops at only because his body has started making decisions his mind stopped arguing with hours ago. He took the exit. He didn't know yet what he was riding toward. He only knew that the tank was low, and that somewhere ahead there'd be coffee, and that stopping, tonight, was easier than continuing to outrun the thing that had followed him this whole route anyway. The exit ramp curved down into nothing he could name yet, just a dark throat of asphalt swallowing his headlight, and he let the bike coast the way he'd let his mind coast for 3 weeks now, backward, always backward, to a kitchen table in a house that wasn't his anymore. His brother had patched in at 19, had worn the same colors he wore now, had sat at the same tables, had learned the same code, what we protect, we keep, and had believed it, for a while, the way young men believe things before the world shows them the fine print. Then came the accident on the county road outside Winnemucca, the shattered femur, the surgery, the pills that followed the surgery the way flies follow a wound. Then came the slow unraveling nobody wanted to call by its name. Then came the day his brother turned in his patch, quiet, almost apologetic, saying he needed something calmer, and the club, grieving in its own way, not knowing yet how much grief was coming, had let him go without much of a fight. 5 years. That was the number that lived behind his ribs now, the way certain numbers do. 5 years between the patch coming off and the morning a woman from the coroner's office called him, calm and practiced, to say his brother had been found in an apartment in Sparks, with a needle still in the crook of his arm, 3 days dead before anyone thought to check. He remembered the phone calls he'd made in between those 5 years. 4, maybe 5 of them. Short ones. "How you doing, brother? You eatin' all right? You need anything?" He remembered the wired $100 he'd sent twice, telling himself it was for groceries, knowing some part of it wasn't. He remembered saying he'd ride up and visit. Reno wasn't far, not by the standards of a man who thought nothing of 800 miles in a weekend, and how that visit had gotten pushed from spring to summer to some vague, mythical later that never arrived, because there was always more road, always another run, always the comfortable lie that a brother who's still breathing is a problem you can solve tomorrow. The lie had worked right up until it stopped working. Now the road did what the road always did for grief like his. It gave the guilt somewhere to go besides sitting still. 60, 70 miles an hour, and the guilt could almost keep up, but not quite. Could almost say the things it wanted to say, but the wind took the words before they finished forming. He had ridden 2 states with that arrangement holding, more or less. Outrunning it. Not outrunning it. Ahead, the dark thinned into a low wash of sodium light, a shape of buildings hunched at the roadside like animals sheltering from weather that wasn't there yet. He throttled down, the engine dropping to a lower register, and let the bike carry him the last quarter mile toward whatever this place was going to turn out to be. The sign came up first, the way things like that always do at night, a wound of light before the shape around it resolves. It buzzed audibly even over the engine, a wasp nest hum riding the still desert air, and the letters spelled out, "Opper Spoon" in tired red glass. The C burned out so long ago that the black socket where it should have been looked less like damage than like the sign had simply been born that way. Below it, smaller, a second sign promised gas motel tires in the same red, and beyond that the shapes of a low motel row, a chain-link tire lot stacked with balled rubber going silver in the moonlight, and the diner itself, squatting at the center of all of it, like the thing the other buildings existed to feed. He pulled the bike into the gravel apron out front and cut the engine, and the silence that came down after it was almost violent in its completeness. No traffic, no wind, just the tick of cooling metal and the sign's tuneless hum going on without him. He sat a moment before swinging off, the way he always did, letting his ears adjust, reading the lot the way another man might read a room. One truck, dust-caked, plates from 2 states over. One county cruiser, empty, parked at an angle that suggested a man who parked wherever he wanted. No other vehicles. Just past 11 on a Tuesday, and the place had the particular emptiness of somewhere that had never been busy and had stopped pretending it might be. Inside, the bell over the door gave a thin, apologetic sound. The diner was long and narrow, a scar of a building, the linoleum floor the color of old teeth, the booths along the window wall upholstered in a red vinyl, gone the color of dried liver, where decades of forearms had rested on it. A ceiling fan turned without conviction. The air smelled of scorched coffee and bleach, and underneath both, the flat grease smell that never leaves a kitchen no matter how long it's been closed. He counted 3 booths, a counter with 8 stools, half the fluorescent tubes overhead either dead or dying, giving the whole room a stuttering underwater cast. He took a stool near the register, out of habit more than plan. The register end of any counter is the end closest to the door, and closest to whoever's paying attention. Down the counter, a man in a canvas jacket ate eggs alone, not looking up. Behind the pass window, something moved, a shape working over a grill, unhurried, and coming toward him from the far end, unwinding herself from whatever she'd been doing near the coffee station, was the waitress. Order pad already in hand, apron faded to a color that used to be green, her face arranged into the specific tiredness of someone 4 hours from the end of a shift that had started long before he'd ever throttled down outside her window. She set the cup down without asking, the way people do in places where everyone drinks the same thing at the same hour, and the coffee inside it was the color of creek water, thin and overbrewed, sitting under a film of its own steam. Her hand didn't shake pouring it. That was the first thing he noticed, the way people who've trained themselves not to shake carry stillness like a weight instead of a grace. "Creams by the napkins," she said, and nodded toward a chrome dispenser that had been dented on one corner, long ago, by something no one would ever explain. He said thank you. She didn't move off right away. Her eyes went past his shoulder, toward the pass-through where the shape behind the grill had resolved into a man in a stained apron, spatula held like he'd forgotten it was in his hand, listening to something outside the frame of the window. From the back, past a curtain of plastic strips gone amber with age, a voice rose, not shouting yet, the register of a man building toward shouting, each word landing a half step harder than the one before it, the way weather builds before it commits to a storm. The words themselves were lost in the building's bad acoustics, but the shape of them wasn't hard to read. Someone was being told something for the 2nd or 3rd time. Someone was being told to be grateful. The waitress's shoulders didn't move, but something behind her face did. A small tightening, gone as fast as it came, the kind of expression a person learns to erase before it finishes forming. "Kitchen's short tonight," she said, to no one, to the counter, wiping at a spot that didn't need wiping. The man in the canvas jacket kept eating his eggs. She glanced toward the pass-through again, then toward the door, where the sheriff's cruiser sat outside the window with its engine ticking as it cooled, headlights still on, throwing 2 long cones of white across the gravel and into the dark beyond it. Then back to the register, where a heavy-set man had appeared without either of them announcing him, filling the frame of the plastic curtain the way certain men fill any doorway, less by size than by the assumption that the space belongs to them. He didn't look at her. He looked at the register, at a ledger lying open beside it with a pen resting in its crease, and at the room in general, the way a man checks a room he owns to make sure it's still behaving. The waitress picked up her pad again. Her thumb found the edge of it and worried it, once, a small motion he might have missed if he hadn't spent 30 years learning to read what people's hands did while their faces stayed calm. "Anything else?" she said, not a question. A door closing gently so as not to wake something. He shook his head. She moved off down the counter, unhurried, toward the coffee station, toward the pass-through, toward whatever waited for her back there in the grease smell and the stuttering light. The heavy-set man stayed by the register a while longer, thumbing through the ledger without reading it, the way a man turns pages to have something to do with his hands. Then he moved back through the plastic curtain, and the kitchen swallowed him, and the fluorescent light kept stuttering like it had somewhere better to be. The biker checked his watch. 11:38. He had told himself he would finish the coffee and get back on the road, find a motel closer to the state line, sleep somewhere that didn't smell like bacon grease and old vinyl. His brother had been 5 years gone from the life before he was gone entirely, and there was a particular kind of tired that came from burying a man twice. Once when he left the chapter, once when he left everything. That tired didn't care what town it sat down in. The waitress came back with the pot. She topped off his cup without asking, the coffee steaming faintly in the cold air pouring off the vent above the counter, and as she set the pot down she slid something else across the formica along with it. A napkin. Folded once into quarters, the paper soft at the crease like it had been folded and unfolded more than once before landing in front of him. She didn't look at him when she did it. She was already turning, already reaching for a rag to wipe a ring of coffee off the counter 3 stools down, her movements unbroken, unremarkable, the practiced choreography of someone who had spent 4 years making sure her hands never told a different story than her face. He looked down at the napkin for a moment before he touched it. Diner napkins didn't usually come folded. They came stacked in a dispenser, pulled 2 or 3 at a time, wadded around a fork. This one had been chosen, folded, carried. He opened it under the counter light. 4 words, ballpoint pen, the ink already smudging where her thumb had pressed against it in her apron pocket. Trust no one here. He read it twice. Then he almost smiled. The private, tired smile of a man who has seen 100 roadside amusements before, waitresses bored enough at midnight to leave notes for truckers, small towns with their small jokes about themselves. He almost folded the napkin back up and left it under the saucer as a tip, the way you'd leave a matchbook from a bar you'd never think of again. But he glanced up first, not at her, at the plastic curtain, still swaying faintly from where the owner had passed through it, and at the sheriff's car outside, engine ticking as it cooled, headlights still bleeding white across the gravel. And he thought about the way her thumb had worried the edge of her pad. He set the napkin down flat on the counter, smoothing the crease with 2 fingers, and did not fold it back up. She came back down the counter to refill the sugar dispensers, and it was then, under the buzzing strip light that ran the length of the counter, that he saw it properly for the first time. She leaned forward to twist the lid off the glass jar, and the light fell flat and unkind across her jaw, the way fluorescent light does, finding what makeup is built to hide. A shadow along the bone, greenish at the edges, yellow closer to the ear, the kind of bruise that has already been a bruise for 3 or 4 days, and is only now starting to fade into something almost the color of the room itself. She had covered it well. Whoever taught her had taught her carefully, a thin hand, patient, practiced. But no concealer holds under that particular light, the kind that makes even healthy skin look embalmed, and for perhaps a second and a half before she straightened up, he saw it whole. He did not say anything. He had spent 30 years learning that the worst thing you can do to a person hiding a wound is to name it too soon. He looked down at his coffee instead, turning the mug a quarter turn on its saucer, the way a man does when he needs his hands to be doing something ordinary, while his mind does something else. He listened to the kitchen. The owner's voice had risen again, not shouting, not yet, but pitched with the particular flatness of a man who enjoys being heard through a wall. Something about a delivery, about somebody not signing for it right, and he watched her shoulders while it happened. He watched them come up an inch and in, the way a dog's ears go back before a hand is even raised, a flinch built entirely out of memory, requiring no actual threat in the room to trigger it. She kept scooping sugar into the dispenser the whole time. Her hands did not shake. That, he thought, was its own kind of training. The voice in the kitchen dropped again, settled into the ordinary clatter of pans, and the hiss of the fryer basket going down into the oil, and her shoulders came down with it, slow, like a held breath let out through the nose, so no one hears it leave. He thought of his brother's hands the last year, how they had trembled reaching for a coffee cup, and gone perfectly still reaching for anything stronger, and how he had told himself that steadiness was proof of nothing. He picked the napkin up again from where it lay flat on the counter, read the 4 words a third time, and this time did not think of roadside jokes or bored waitresses at midnight. He thought of the plastic curtain, the sheriff's cooling engine outside, and the particular quiet of a woman doing arithmetic on how many more months she could keep her shoulders from telling the truth before someone else read them the way he just had. The bell over the door gave its small, tired ring, and the sheriff came in, the way a man enters a room he has entered 1,000 times before, without looking at it. He was lean in the way of men who ran on cigarettes and black coffee instead of food, sunburned across the back of the neck in a line as straight as a collar, and he did not glance at the biker at the counter, did not glance at the waitress, did not glance at anything except the pass-through window to the kitchen, where the owner's shape had appeared again, wiping his hands on his apron. "Morning," the sheriff said, to no one and everyone, and walked past the counter toward the coffee station like a man walking through his own kitchen. He poured his own cup. No one moved to stop him. No cash register opened, no ticket printed, no waitress stepped forward to ring him up, and the biker watched the whole transaction happen in the negative space of what did not occur, the missing exchange of money being its own kind of loud. Then the sheriff looked toward the pass-through window, and the owner looked back, and something passed between them that had no need of words. It was not a greeting. It was not even really a look of recognition. It was the flat, unhurried acknowledgement of two men confirming an arrangement neither of them needed to name out loud, the way old business partners nod across a room instead of shaking hands. The biker had spent decades reading rooms where a wrong glance could end a friendship or start a war, and he knew the difference between men who were merely tired of each other and men who were quietly, permanently complicit. This was the second kind. This was two men agreeing, without a syllable spoken, that nothing here was worth looking into. The sheriff carried his coffee to a booth by the window, sat with his back to the wall the way trained men do, and did not open a newspaper or take out a phone. He simply watched the parking lot, the way a man watches something he has been paid to watch. The biker turned his own cup slowly on its saucer, feeling the ceramic scrape faint against the counter's laminate, and did not look at the sheriff directly again. He didn't need to. He had already gotten what he came for in that one exchanged glance, confirmation that the badge in this county was not an obstacle to whatever was happening in the kitchen, but a kind of insurance policy, paid for in coffee that never got rung up, and in silences that cost far more than money. The waitress had gone still behind the counter, sugar dispenser forgotten in her hand, watching the booth by the window the way a woman watches weather she has already decided she cannot outrun. The sugar dispenser found its place back on the counter, and she wiped a spot that did not need wiping, the rag moving in small circles like a habit that had outlived its purpose. The sheriff's coffee steamed untouched at the window booth. The kitchen door swung once, releasing a breath of grease-heavy heat, and the clatter of a pan set down too hard, then settled shut again. "They came up from Sonora," she said, so quietly he had to lean a fraction toward her to catch it. "3 of them. 2 brothers and a cousin, I think. Maybe not cousin. Family gets complicated when nobody wants to write it down anywhere." She glanced toward the pass-through window, where a shape moved behind the steel shelf, ladling something from a pot. "They started in March. Owner put them on the books for 4 hours a shift. They worked 10, sometimes 12. Her rag stopped moving. I've seen the real schedule. It's on a clipboard in the walk-in, under the delivery invoices, different ink than what he types up for the file he keeps in the office." The biker said nothing, let the coffee cup make its slow revolution again. "They get paid in cash," she went on. "Less than the register shows. He tells them it's rent for the trailers out back, tells them it's for the paperwork he never files. He tells them a lot of things." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment the concealer along her bruise seemed thinner than it had an hour before, as if the muscle beneath it remembered something the makeup could not cover. They don't argue. They can't. Where would they go? Who would they call? She looked at the sheriff's booth again, and something passed over her face that was not quite fear and not quite disgust, but sat somewhere in the country between them, a resignation so old it had stopped feeling like an emotion and started feeling like weather. "He drives by their trailers some nights," she said, "just to remind them he can." The biker turned his cup a final quarter turn and set it still. "You've seen the real schedule," he said, not a question. "I asked to see it, once." Her hand went, briefly, unconsciously, to the line of her jaw before she caught herself and let it fall. That was 3 nights ago. The kitchen door swung again, and this time a shape lingered in the gap. A young man, maybe 25, wiping his hands on an apron gone gray from washing, his eyes finding the waitress for half a second before dropping to the floor and disappearing back into the steam and clatter, as though even eye contact with her cost something he had already spent. The biker watched the door settle shut and did not touch his coffee and did not look toward the window booth and felt the shape of the whole thing arranging itself in him the way weather arranges itself before a storm the almanac hasn't predicted, quietly and completely and without asking anyone's permission. She did not tell it like a confession. That was the thing he noticed first, the absence of apology in her voice, the way she laid the words down flat on the counter like she was setting silverware, each one in its place, no more weight given to one than another. I asked him for the real sheets, she said. Not the ones he shows the state, if anyone ever asks. The ones in the back drawer. The ones with the actual hours. She wiped a ring of coffee that wasn't there, an old habit finding nothing to do and doing it anyway. He told me to mind my tables. The biker said nothing. He had learned, a long time ago, in rooms far from diners, that silence pulled more out of people than questions did. I asked twice, she said. The second time he came around the counter. Her eyes went to the pass-through window, briefly, and came back. He hit me once, open hand. I went into the pie case. A small, humorless breath, almost a laugh, the kind that isn't one. Cracked the glass on the lemon meringue. He made me pay for it out of my tips. The fluorescent light above the register buzzed, dimmed, steadied. 3 nights ago, she said, and touched her jaw again, this time without pretending she hadn't, tracing the line of it under the concealer, like she was checking a fact she already knew. I put ice on it in the walk-in freezer so my face wouldn't swell before my shift. The biker's jaw set, a slow tightening along the hinge of it, the same motion a fence post makes, settling into frozen ground, small and total and silent. His hand, resting on the counter, curled once around nothing and then opened again, deliberate, like a man putting down a tool he'd picked up out of habit. He did not say that it was wrong. She already knew it was wrong. Naming it would have cost her something and given her nothing. He did not say he was sorry. Sorry was a word for accidents. Instead he asked, "Does the sheriff know?" She looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that measures a man for what he might do with an answer before deciding whether to give it. "The sheriff drinks his coffee here every morning at 6, she said. Black, no sugar, same booth. She nodded, almost imperceptibly, toward the window seat, where the lean man in the tan uniform sat, turning his fork over a plate he'd barely touched. He knows everything that happens in this building. That's why nothing happens to him for knowing it. Outside, a truck downshifted somewhere on the dark highway, the sound rising and falling and gone, swallowed by distance, the way most things out here eventually were. The biker looked once, briefly, at the ledger left open by the register, its columns of ink catching the buzzing light, and then back at her steady, unflinching face, and understood that the storm he'd felt arranging itself inside him had just found its shape. He did not press her. Pressing was what other men did, men who mistook silence for a door left ajar. He let the quiet sit between them, the way he'd learned to let quiet sit in rooms with men who'd just come back from somewhere they couldn't talk about yet, and after a while, she filled it herself, the way people always did, when the waiting became heavier than the telling. "I called the county line once," she said. Her voice had gone flat, the way a voice goes when it has decided not to shake. Back in the spring, told them there was a man threatening one of the kitchen boys, told them I had a name and a time. She turned the rag over in her hands, folding it the way she'd folded the napkin, precise, practiced, a woman who kept her hands busy so the rest of her wouldn't have to feel anything. 20 minutes later, a cruiser pulled into that lot. She nodded toward the window, toward the gravel apron where his bike sat cooling under the buzzing sign. Not to the diner, to his house. A small, humorless breath. The owner's. I watched it from the parking lot lights go on in the kitchen and off again, and the next morning that boy didn't come to work, and the morning after that either. The biker said nothing. He had heard confessions before, in VA parking lots and clubhouse back rooms, men unloading things they'd carried too long, and he knew the shape of a true one. It never asked for anything, it only set the weight down and waited to see if you'd flinch. He did not flinch. After that, she said, I stopped trusting doors with badges on them. She said it simply, the way you'd say you stopped trusting a stove that had burned you once. A fact learned young and never revisited. You call, and the call goes somewhere you didn't send it. You ask for help, and help drives straight to the man you're afraid of, and has coffee. She looked at the ledger by the register, then at the booth by the window where the fork kept turning against the plate. Patient, unbothered, a man untroubled by the arithmetic of other people's fear. So now I don't ask. I just watch, and I write things on napkins for strangers passing through, because strangers passing through are the only ones who don't already belong to somebody here. Outside, the wind found some loose flashing on the motel roof and worked it, a slow metallic complaint rising and falling under the hum of the sign. The biker thought of the last badge he'd trusted, years back, and what it had cost his brother to trust the wrong ones after him, and he understood, with the particular clarity that comes only late at night in places time forgot, that whatever he did next would have to happen quietly enough that no phone call could reach it first. He recognized the voice before he recognized the reason for it, that particular flatness people reach for when hope has stopped being useful to them, a tone with no rise and no fall, the sound of someone reporting weather rather than living inside it. He had heard it before, on a phone call 3 weeks and a lifetime ago, his brother's voice describing a debt, a man, a room he was staying in, all of it delivered in the same even register, as though enthusiasm were a language he had lost the ability to speak. At the time he had heard tiredness and told himself it was nothing worse. He understood now, sitting at a counter 600 miles from that memory, that he had misread it once already and did not intend to misread it twice. She was not asking him to fix anything. He saw that clearly, the way you see the shape of a fence post at night by the absence of light around it. She had not asked for a ride, or a name, or a number to call, and she flinched faintly when he shifted his weight on the stool, as though bracing for the size of whatever he might offer, some gesture too large for the space she had left it in. What she had done was hand him 4 words and go back to wiping a counter that did not need wiping, a woman conserving herself the way a person conserves water in a place with no rain, careful, unspectacular, built for endurance rather than rescue. He thought of his brother again, of the version of himself who had wanted, back then, to ride down there and put his fist through the nearest available thing, and how that want had been for himself, for the unbearable feeling of standing still, and not for his brother at all. His brother had needed someone to sit with him in the slow arithmetic of getting out, not someone to perform anger on his behalf. He had learned that too late to use it. He was not going to learn it too late again. So he did not reach for her arm, did not lower his voice into the register men use when they mean to be heroic. He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn on its saucer, an unhurried, deliberate motion, and let the silence between them hold its shape a while longer, the fork still working against the plate in the booth by the window, the wind still worrying the loose flashing on the motel roof. Patience was not what he was built for. He had built himself, over 3 decades, into something meant to be a wall, not a listener, but he understood, watching her set 2 more cups on their saucers with the flat, practiced calm of a woman who had learned not to expect anything from a room, that tonight, the only thing he could offer her that would not get her killed was time, and the discipline not to spend it wrong. The sheriff's cruiser pulled out of the gravel lot at 12:11, headlights sweeping once across the darkened tire yard before swinging onto the highway and dissolving into the dark toward whatever else in the county needed not seeing that night. The biker watched it go from the window, tracking the taillights until they were only a suggestion of red against the black, and he felt something in his shoulders come down half an inch, though he did not let it show. The owner disappeared into the back a few minutes later, his voice carrying through the kitchen door in the particular register of a man giving orders he expected no argument against. Pots. A radio turned low. The clatter of someone moving fast because moving slow cost something. The register sat at the end of the counter, an old mechanical thing with a ledger book beside it, spine cracked soft from years of being left open. The biker rose, unhurried, the way a man rises who has all the time in the world and nowhere particular to be, and set two worn bills beside his coffee cup, as if counting out exact change required his full attention. The ledger lay open to a page of names written in a cramped hand, dollar figures beside them that did not match anything a person could live on, and beneath it, half slid from a manila folder, a stack of timesheets with hours crossed out and rewritten in a different ink. Lower, always lower, the alterations not even hidden, just corrected the way a man corrects things when he has stopped believing anyone will ever ask. He took his phone from his jacket, thumbed it open as if checking a text, and let the camera do what his eyes had already done twice. One frame of the ledger page, one of the timesheets, close enough to catch the crossed-out numbers, the different ink. He did not linger. He did not straighten the folder or make it look undisturbed, only let it fall back the half-inch it had already been sitting at, because a careful man does not become careless out of triumph. The waitress passed behind him with a coffee pot, close enough that her sleeve nearly touched his arm, and did not look down at what he was doing, and did not look up at his face either. She had the specific stillness of someone who had learned that not seeing was sometimes the only gift she had left to give. From the back, the owner's voice rose sharp over something in the kitchen, a name he didn't recognize, sworn at in two languages at once, and the biker slid his phone back into his jacket and sat down on his stool, as if he had never left it, folding his hands around the coffee cup, letting the steam climb slow into his face, while his pulse, which had not changed rhythm the entire time, went on beating exactly as it had before. He had what he needed now. What he did not yet have was a way to use it without spending her. The bell over the door made its small, tired sound when he pushed through it, and the cold hit him the way Nevada cold always did after midnight. Total, dry, without mercy, the kind of cold that made a man feel every year of his back and every mile still ahead of him. He walked past his bike without touching it, past the gas pumps standing like sentries under a light that flickered on a 2-second delay, and out to the edge of the lot where the asphalt gave up and became gravel, and then became nothing but scrub reaching toward a sky so full of stars it looked like a wound that had never closed. He took out his phone. He did not hesitate over the number. The chapter president answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep and then not, the way it always sharpened once he understood a call at that hour meant something. "Talk to me." The biker talked. He kept his voice low, flat, the register a man uses for a casualty report. No adjectives in it, nothing that could be mistaken for feeling. 3 names on the timesheets that didn't match the hours worked. A ledger with 2 columns that should have been 1. A waitress with a bruise she'd painted over, and a sheriff who'd sat in that diner for 40 minutes like he owned the light fixtures, badge catching the buzz of the sign each time he moved his head. He gave the dates he'd seen written in the ledger's margin. He gave the shift times, the wage figures, the gap between what was logged and what a person could actually live on. He did not editorialize. He did not say what he wanted done. There was a silence on the line that was not empty, the particular silence of a man doing arithmetic with someone else's suffering. "You got pictures?" "I got pictures." "Good man." A breath exhaled slow, audible even through the phone, even across 300 miles of dark highway between them. "I know somebody at the Labor Commissioner's office. Owes me from a thing in '09. I'll call in the morning, but I need you to sit on this. No heat till we know how deep the sheriff's in it. I know how to sit on things." "I know you do." A pause that carried its own weight, the kind that passed between men who had buried people together. "How you holding up otherwise?" "I'm not calling about that." "Didn't ask if you were." The biker looked back toward the diner, its window a small yellow rectangle, holding the waitress inside it, like something pressed under glass, moving between tables. With a coffee pot she held the way. Other people held things they were afraid to drop. The cold moved through his jacket and found nothing to stop it, and he let it, because feeling the cold was better, some nights, than feeling anything else. "Get me that number," he said, "and get it fast." The line went quiet except for the small static of distance, and into that quiet the president spoke again, slower this time, the way a man speaks when he wants the words to be heard twice. Listen to me. We don't move on this like it's a bar fight. We move on it like it's a case. The biker said nothing, and the president took the silence for what it was, which was resistance. I know what you want to do, the president said. I know exactly what you want to do, because I've wanted to do it myself, more times than I can count. You want to walk back in there and put that man's face into his own register. And maybe he'd deserve it. But that woman doesn't get her back pay from a broken nose. She doesn't get her name cleared. She gets nothing but a headline about bikers and a beating, and the sheriff writes the report, and the sheriff decides what's true. A pause, the kind that let the words settle into the ground before more were laid on top of them. You want this to hold. You want it to hold in a courtroom, not just in your chest. The biker looked down at the gravel, at the toe of his boot pushing a small stone half an inch, and then leaving it there, unfinished, the way so much else in his life had been left unfinished. I know how it holds, he said. I'm not asking permission to do something stupid. Didn't say you were. The president's voice softened. Not much, just enough to be noticed by a man trained to notice small things. But I know what waiting costs you. I know what watching costs you, especially now, so I'm going to say it once, and then I'm going to let you decide what kind of man you're going to be about it. Don't move. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not till we know how deep that badge is buried in this. You do anything that spooks him, he covers it in an hour. Ledger's gone, sheets gone, and that girl's still standing behind that counter with a bruise, and no proof, and no one left to believe her. The biker's jaw worked once, then stilled. That's the whole of it, the president said. You sit. You watch. You get me anything else that crosses your path, and you let this move the way the law moves, slow and ugly and real, so it can't be undone by somebody with a badge and a grudge. I hear you. I know you do. That's why I called you and not somebody else. The line went dead with a small click, ordinary as a door closing, and the biker stood there in the cold a moment longer, phone still in his hand, looking at the diner's yellow window and the shape moving behind it, unaware yet of the machinery beginning, slowly, to turn on her behalf. He put the phone in his jacket pocket and stood a while longer in the lot, letting the cold settle into his knees the way it did now, a reminder that 58 years had passed through him and left their weather. The sky to the east had not yet decided anything. It held that gray-blue thinness that comes before first light, when the desert looks like it's holding its breath, and the diner's window burned yellow against it, small and stubborn. He went back in a little before 5. She was alone at the register, counting a drawer that didn't need counting, the kind of busy work people invent so their hands have somewhere to be. She looked up when the bell over the door sounded, and something in her face braced, quick and practiced, before she recognized him and let it go slack again. He took the same stool. Eggs, he said. Over easy. Toast dry. She wrote it down, though there was no one else to write it for, and disappeared through the pass-through, and came back a few minutes later, with a plate he had no appetite for, and set it in front of him without a word. He ate 2 bites so the eating would look real. You don't have to do anything different, he said, low, not looking at her, looking at the plate like a man discussing nothing more than his breakfast. Not tonight. Not this week. Whatever you'd normally do, you keep doing that. Her hand stilled on the rag she'd been using to wipe a counter already clean. Somebody's coming, he said. Not me. People who know how to make this stick so it can't be unstuck. But it takes time, and time only works if nothing spooks anybody before it's ready. How long? I don't know yet. Longer than you want, shorter than it feels. She was quiet, and in that quiet he watched her decide something, the way people do when they've been disappointed by promises before, and are weighing whether this one is different, and he let her take the time she needed, because rushing her would have been its own kind of lie. Okay, she said finally, and went back to the register, and did not ask him anything else, and that, not asking, told him more about what she'd survived than any question could have. He finished the eggs he didn't want because leaving them would have looked like nerves, and left cash under the plate the way he always did. No note this time, no folded paper, nothing that could be found and read by the wrong hands. Outside, The sky had gone the color of a healing bruise, purple thinning toward yellow at the rim of the world, and he stood by his bike a moment before swinging his leg over, looking once more at the window, at her shape moving behind the counter, steady, unremarkable, exactly as instructed. Then he rode east, toward nothing in particular, because a man who stayed too long would be remembered for staying. He did not go far. 10 miles east, where the highway forked past a shuttered feed store and a water tower with no name on it anymore, he found a motel with 6 rooms and a vacancy sign that had long since stopped needing the neon, since no one drove this road at night who didn't already know where they were sleeping. He paid cash, gave a name that wasn't his, and lay on top of the bedspread without undressing, boots still on, because a man who has ridden 30 years learns to sleep the way soldiers do, close to the surface, ready to surface fast. He did not dream. He had stopped dreaming the year his brother went into the ground, as if his mind had decided there was nothing left worth rehearsing in the dark. He woke at 4 without an alarm, the way he always did, the habit older than the grief, and lay for a moment listening to the building settle and the highway breathe outside the window, empty, ticking with the last cool of the desert night, before the heat came back to claim it. He was on the road before the sun cleared the ridge, the sky still the flat gray of something not yet decided, and he did not stop at the motel office to check out, because there was no one there to check out with. Instead, on his way past the diner window of the little motel cafe, closed, chairs upside down on tables, he saw the coffee cup he'd carried out from Copper Flat the night before, sitting on the bike's saddlebag where he'd set it and forgotten it, half full, gone cold. He picked it up, poured it out into the gravel, and set a folded 50 beneath where the cup had sat on the counter ledge inside, though there was no one working the register to find it, and he did this anyway, because the money wasn't payment. It was a way of telling himself he did not take without leaving something in return, not even from an empty room. The phone was in his inside vest pocket, the photographs of the ledger and the falsified timesheet sitting in it like something with weight, something that could not be undone once it left his hands and entered another man's. He had not called yet. He would call from farther away, from a gas station near the state line where the cell towers were reliable and no local ear could triangulate a name to a face at a truck stop in Copper Flat. He kicked the bike to life in the gray light, the engine loud and lonely against the stillness of the empty lot, and pulled out onto the highway heading east, the road already beginning to shimmer faintly at its far edges where the heat would gather by noon, dust rising thin behind his rear wheel, like something following him that he could not yet name and would not be able to shake until the call was made. The gas station near the state line had 2 pumps and a bell that rang when the door opened, and he used the payphone bolted to the outer wall because a payphone left no history in a pocket that could be searched. The chapter president answered on the second ring, the way he always did, as if he slept with the phone in his hand. He did not waste words. He said what he had seen, what he had photographed, what a bruise looked like under fluorescent light, when a woman had learned to apply concealer in the dark of a bathroom with no mirror worth trusting. The president listened the way he had always listened, decades of listening worn into him like tread worn into a tire, and said he would make calls of his own. What followed did not happen quickly, and it did not happen loudly. It happened the way water finds a crack in stone, patient, unhurried, following the path of least resistance until the stone gave way. The retired lawyer drove out first, unremarkable in a rented sedan, and sat across from 2 of the 3 kitchen workers in a back booth of a diner 40 miles from Copper Flat, taking statements in a notebook with a pen that did not hurry. The third worker would not speak yet, not for weeks, fear having its own timetable that no lawyer could shorten. The labor board contact, a woman the president had known since a workers' comp case 11 years earlier, began pulling financial records through channels that left no fingerprints on Copper Flat itself. Payroll filings, tax documents, the quiet paper trail a business leaves behind, even when it tries not to. The sheriff's cash envelopes proved harder, until a confidential informant inside the county, someone who owed the labor board contact a favor from another case entirely, began describing a pattern, an envelope handed off at the same gas station every first Friday, always in the same brand of pickup truck, always for less than a minute. Small things, verifiable things. The kind of details that meant nothing alone and everything together. The way a single napkin folded into quarters meant nothing until it was set beside a ledger, a bruise, and a name spoken quietly into a payphone at dawn. He rode home to wherever home was those days, which was mostly wherever the road put him, and waited the way a man waits who has learned that waiting is its own kind of work, the kind his brother never had the patience for, the kind that might have saved him if either of them had known it in time. On the 8th morning, Copper Flat woke to a sound it had not heard in years, the low-building thunder of engines in formation, not one bike but 8, moving together down the dead stretch of highway like something the desert itself had decided to send. The sky was the color of a healing bruise, pale yellow bleeding into gray, the kind of dawn that comes cold before the heat remembers its job. Frost still clung to the weeds along the shoulder. A jackrabbit broke from the sagebrush and did not stop running until it was out of sight. He heard them before he saw them, standing outside the Copper Spoon with a cup of gas station coffee going cold in his hand, steam lifting off it into air sharp enough to hurt the lungs. He had ridden back in the night before, alone, and taken a room at the motel he now understood was owned by the same man who had taken 4 years of a woman's labor and called it generosity. The riders came in a loose diamond formation, chrome catching the thin light, leather creaking audible even at that distance in the stillness of a town with no other noise to compete against it. Behind them, keeping pace but separate, a government sedan, plain and gray, the kind of car built to be forgotten the moment it passed. Behind that, a second car, older, driven by a lean man in a gray suit who had spent 30 years making sure paperwork could not be argued with. The riders did not stop at the diner. They pulled instead into the gravel lot beside the sheriff's cruiser, parked outside the county building where the town's business, what little of it there was, got conducted between coffee breaks. Engines died one by one, the silence after them heavier than the sound had been. The investigator stepped out of the sedan first, a woman in her 40s in a plain wool coat, a folder under one arm thick enough to end things. The lawyer followed, unhurried, adjusting his cuffs as though he had all day, which, in a sense, he did. He watched from across the lot, not moving, the coffee cooling untouched in his hand. This was not his part of it anymore, and he understood that the way he understood most things now, quietly, without needing to be told twice. Through the diner window he saw her, apron still on, dish towel forgotten over one shoulder, watching the same scene with both hands pressed flat against the counter, as if she needed something solid to hold. Neither of them moved toward the other yet. There would be time for that. The sheriff came out of the county building at 9:14 by the clock on the bank sign across the street, one hand still tucking in his shirt, the other reaching for the radio clipped at his shoulder before he had even registered what was parked in front of him. He never got there. 2 troopers in state gray stepped from a car he hadn't noticed idling near the propane tank, and something in the way they positioned themselves, unhurried, practiced, made the reach stop halfway, his arm hanging in the air like a man caught mid-sentence with nothing left to say. He looked toward the diner once, a long look, and then he did not look again. Inside the Copper Spoon, the investigator set the folder on the counter without ceremony, squaring its edges the way a woman squares a stack of bills before handing over change. The owner's hand moved toward the coffee cup in front of him, an old habit, the kind of motion a body performs when the mind has nowhere else to send it. His fingers found the handle and then hesitated there, trembling slightly, not from cold. He did not drink. He set the cup back down with a small, unsteady click against the saucer, and the sound seemed enormous in a room that had gone otherwise silent. The investigator opened the folder just enough to show the first page, falsified timesheets, a photograph, a date, and closed it again just as quickly, as if to say the rest could wait, or did not need to be seen twice. She said something low, procedural, the kind of language that exists to close doors gently instead of slamming them. The owner's mouth opened. Nothing came out that resembled defense. Through the window, he watched the lawyer approach the sheriff's cruiser at his own unhurried pace, Hands still, expression unreadable. A man who had done this enough times that urgency had long since worn off him like paint off an old fence. The troopers said something he could not hear. The sheriff's shoulders came down half an inch, the particular slump of a man realizing the version of the day he had planned was no longer available to him. He did not go inside yet. He stood by his bike in the gravel, boots planted, the coffee finally cold in his hand, and let the scene finish itself the way it needed to, quietly, without him at the center of it. Through the glass, her eyes found his once, just once, and held there a beat longer than the moment required. Then she looked back at the folder, because there was still work being done that mattered more than looking at him. The citation book made the loudest sound in the parking lot, a small mechanical click as the trooper tore free a page and handed it across without ceremony, the way a man hands over a receipt for something already paid. No shouting followed it. No hands went to belts. The sheriff signed where he was told to sign, his pen moving slow, the ink catching the last of the daylight the way water catches light, right before it goes still. Above them all, the half-lit sign kept its patient hum, the buzzing constant it had always been, indifferent to whether the letters spelled out a diner or a crime scene, indifferent to the fact that in 8 days it would need a new name entirely. Inside, she had not moved from the window. Her hands were flat on the counter, palms down, the way a person braces without meaning to, as if the building itself might tip if she let go. The investigator's voice reached her only as tone now, not words. She had heard enough words for one night. She watched the owner led toward the second cruiser with a hand loosely at his elbow, not gripping, not needing to, because there was nowhere left for a man like that to run in a town this size, on a highway this empty. She watched the way he did not look back at her, and understood that this too was its own kind of answer, that he had never actually seen her, not once, not in 4 years, only the hours she could be made to give away. There was no triumph in her face. He noted that first, from where he stood by the bike, the coffee going cold in his hand. He had expected something to break open in her, some visible unclenching, and instead what surfaced was exhaustion, plain, unadorned, the particular tiredness of a body that has been holding a shape for so long it no longer remembers the shape underneath. Her shoulders came down not in relief but in permission, as if some structure that had been propping her upright for years had just been told it could finally rest. The lawyer folded his papers with the unhurried care of a man closing an account that had been open too long. The trooper's radio crackled once, procedural, already moving on to whatever came next in the county, and she stood there in the doorway of the Copper Spoon, watching the last of it settle into paperwork and taillights, not yet crying, not yet smiling, only breathing, for what looked, from where he stood, like the first time in a very long while. The weeks that followed moved the way water moves through a cracked pipe, slow, then sudden, then slow again. He stayed in Copper Flat longer than he had stayed anywhere in a decade, renting a room above the tire lot that no longer belonged to the man who had built it, watching the paperwork arrive in manila envelopes that the county clerk's office seemed almost embarrassed to be issuing. The 3 kitchen workers received their back pay in a single check each, numbers that would have meant nothing to a man who hadn't watched them, counted out in cash from an owner's fist, $5 short every time. Under the labor trafficking witness provision, their status shifted from something precarious into something with paper behind it, visas, hearing dates, a caseworker who called twice a week from Reno and always asked, first, whether they were eating enough. The waitress's paperwork came slower, more careful, the kind of slow that lawyers call diligence and everyone else calls waiting. Protected witness status, when it finally arrived, looked like nothing. A letter, a signature, a number to call if anyone came asking questions she hadn't answered yet. She read it twice at the counter of the Copper Spoon, which was closed now, chained, the half-lit sign finally, mercifully, dark. It was the chapter president who told her about the other diner. He said it plainly, the way he said most things, standing in the gravel lot with his hands in his jacket pockets, that the club held a paper stake through a holding company with a name that meant nothing to anyone outside a filing cabinet, in a diner 2 counties over called the Blue Ridge, and that it needed someone who knew how a kitchen should run when nobody was skimming from it. She didn't answer right away. She looked instead at the biker leaning against his bike, coffee long gone cold, saying nothing, which by then she had learned was not indifference but its opposite. She took the job in the second week of October, the same week the trees along the county road turned the color of rust and let go of themselves all at once. She drove out to the Blue Ridge alone, in a car that was hers now, no envelope of cash waiting to explain it, and stood in the doorway of a diner that smelled of hash browns and old coffee, and nothing at all like fear. The kitchen staff, who had once worked the Copper Spoon's back hours, came with her, one by one, over the following months, until the crew felt less like survivors relocated and more like people simply working a job, which had been the entire, quiet point of it. He watched all of it happen the way he watched weather, present, patient, unhurried, and did not yet understand that he would keep watching it for years. She testified once, in November, in a county courthouse with radiators that ticked and hissed against the cold. It took 11 minutes. She named dates, she named amounts. She described a ledger she had seen once, upside down, on a counter she had wiped 10,000 times, and she did not cry, though the prosecutor had warned her she might, and afterward she sat in the hallway on a wooden bench and shook for a long time, in a way that had nothing to do with fear anymore. The lawyer in the gray suit sat beside her and said nothing, which she had come, by then, to recognize as a kind of company. After that, the seasons did the rest of the work. She learned the register first, not the drawer, which she had run for 4 years at the Copper Spoon, but the books behind it, the margins and the losses, the difference between a diner that survived and one that merely opened its doors each morning out of habit. The chapter president's contact at the labor commissioner's office had recommended a woman who did small business accounting for cash-strapped diners across 3 counties, and she came out twice a month through the winter, sitting with her at the counter after close, showing her how numbers could tell the truth instead of hiding it. By February, she was ordering inventory herself. By April, she had let go of nothing and hired 2 more, both from families who'd heard, the way word travels in small dead towns, that the Blue Ridge was a place a person could work without flinching. The stake came slower and quieter than any of it, a line added to a holding agreement, a signature witnessed by the lawyer, a percentage that grew the way trust grows, in increments too small to notice except in aggregate. He came through every few weeks, never announced, riding the same stretch of highway that had once carried him away from a funeral he still dreamed about. He sat at the same stool. He ordered the same coffee, black, and let it go cold sometimes without seeming to mind. He never asked how the books looked. He never mentioned the ledger, the sheriff, the 8 days that had changed the shape of her life. He talked, when he talked at all, about the road, the weather, a diner 200 miles east, with pie worth the detour, small, unremarkable things, offered the way a man offers something he has decided is safe to give. She noticed, without saying so, that he always chose the stool nearest the door, the one with the clearest line to the parking lot, the one a man chooses when he intends, without needing to say it, to keep watching the road behind someone else's back. Dusk came to the crossroads the way it always did in that country, without ceremony, the sky going the color of a healed bruise before settling into full dark. She turned the sign from open to closed at 7, same as every night now, and moved through the diner with the particular economy of someone who has learned exactly how many steps separate the register from the last booth, the coffee station from the door. He stayed on his stool while she worked. He always did, on the nights he came through. She wiped down the counter in long, unhurried strokes. She counted the drawer twice, out of habit rather than distrust. She checked the lock on the walk-in, the one that used to stick, the one the old owner never fixed because fixing things cost money he'd rather keep for himself. It opened smooth now, small thing. She noticed it every time, the way people notice the absence of a pain they'd stopped expecting to end. The napkin hung where it always hung, framed in plain wood beside the register, the ink gone the soft brown of something pressed under glass for a year. 4 words. She did not look at it often anymore. She did not need to. He finished his coffee, cold in the cup, the way he let it go sometimes. He did not say anything about the drawer, or the lock, or the year. He never did. He set $2 beside the saucer, more than the coffee cost, less than a debt could ever be repaid in currency that small, and he stood the way older men stand, with a hand briefly on the counter for balance that he didn't quite need. She glanced at him once, the way she always did, not with a question, just an accounting, the same stool, the same door in his sightline, the same silence that asked nothing and promised everything. Outside, the highway had already gone the color of the sky, headlights rare and far between, the kind of road that swallows a man whole if no one is watching for him. He would ride it again tonight, east or west. It hardly mattered which. He always came back to this stool eventually. Some debts are not paid in a lump sum. They are paid the way trust is built, a coffee at a time, a season at a time, a man showing up at a counter and asking for nothing, until showing up becomes the only proof anyone needs. If you've ever known a place like this one, a stretch of road that almost swallowed someone whole, tell us where you're watching from.